All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Psychedelic Scene Podcast. Today with me, our guest is Dr. Randall Hansen, who is the author of this new and fabulous book, Triumph Over Trauma. And Dr. Randall Hansen, oh yeah, here's the book, and it's
Mhm.
also on his screen right there.
Mhm.
He's been an educator his entire life. He has been focusing on transforming the lives of people for the past 20 years, with a special focus on life balance, health, foods, and wellness. He discovered the healing power of psychedelic medicines about 3 years ago, and he has made it his mission since then to be a strong advocate for the intentional use of psychedelics for healing. His own life, as well as the lives of many he knows, has been transformed through intentional use of psychedelic medicines. He lives a joyous and gratitude-filled life with his amazing life partner, wife Jenny, on a little forested hilltop overlooking a natural lake in the PNW. All right, Dr. Randall, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Adam. I'm excited to be here. I appreciate all the kind words you've already said about the book, and I'm excited to kind of delve into some of your reactions, which are probably going to be some of the same reactions readers might have.
Yeah, the one thing I really like about this book in particular versus other psychedelic books, and there's a lot of them, and they're all really good,
Yeah,
but I think this one has a uniqueness to it in that you wanted to give people an opportunity to share how psychedelics transformed their life, but not only that, you wanted to be like a diverse group of people from a variety of different communities and especially marginalized communities. It's a lot of these stories are women or from people in the BIPOC community, the Black, Indigenous, people of color community. And as we know, even in this psychedelic space, even though it tends to be more progressive, except for some exceptions to that, we still have um, these marginalized communities seem to still be a like underrepresented voice. We don't hear a lot of people in these communities, except maybe some Native American communities, talking about their transformation with these experiences. And this book in particular is really good at, giving some of them a voice that we
yeah,
may not. Yeah.
yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah, that I didn't set out to write a book on psychedelics, but I had this. Amazing LSD journey. And at the very end of the journey, what sometimes people describe as they get a digital download. And I definitely got the digital download. I can't describe it. It wasn't a voice. I guess I would say it was energy of some sort. And it said, you're going to write this book, but it's really about the voices of people, everyday people that have done these medicines and have their lives transformed. So I love that that's your focus too. 23 stories, and that was sort of my goal that was told to me was, find as wide a range as possible of people from all walks of life, all backgrounds, and all medicines, and that's what I tried to do so that my goal was that anyone could pick up this book and find at least one story that they could relate to, either by the person themselves or their ethnicity or their age or their trauma, all these things. So so far I've heard just really positive feedback about these stories, and so I'm very happy about that.
Yeah, that's really good. I like how you mention so that anybody can have some story in the book where they can particularly personally relate to.
Yeah.
I'm a teacher, and one of the things we were told in our teacher training recently was that one way to make students feel more welcome is to put things on the wall so that they feel like they're
Mm.
represented. So if, maybe there would be something in there about from a Native American like art or something along those lines. That way, somebody who comes into the classroom as Native American feels, hey, I'm welcomed here. I feel like there's a little bit of me in this room, and I'm not just a foreigner who's
Yeah,
unwelcomed. Yeah, that's
exactly. I think that's exactly true. You know, we all want to be seen, and seen that we exist, not seen that we're the greatest or whatever, but just seen that we exist. And I think that that's a great idea of putting something on the walls that says that's mine. I belong in this room. That's cool. That's great.
yeah. And so I thought we could start with like about a little bit about like your background. I think
Sure.
if I remember, you were a professor.
Yeah, I kind of I guess my occupation has been professor for most of my life. I think the hat that I finally accepted was educator. And that's the other part about this book too is um as you research psychedelics and as you research um, some of the parallel aspects of how we deal with trauma or depression, we see the pharmaceutical path, and delving into both of those things made my educator head explode because we have the war on drugs, which was a lie about these, especially about the psychedelic medicines, that they had no healing power, which we've known not only from the indigenous cultures, but we've known from scientific research in the 60s that was all shut down. And then if we look at the pharmaceutical side of things, you look at the research done on SSRIs, and you see that they were only studied for extremely short periods of time because that's what they were designed for. They were designed for a depressive moment or depressive episode. And so you would take it for 3, 4, 5 days, whatever, until that episode passed, and then you would stop. But we've seen now it's a lifetime addiction in a sense to these pharmaceuticals. So that just made my, the educator in me say this, this book has to be written. We have to expose these lies, and then the storytellers just pump that up to a higher level. Uh, but back to what you were asking. So my background uh, is in educating, teaching, writing. Been doing that for pretty much all my life. But I got into health really just from a selfish standpoint about 20 years ago, where a friend gave me this book, and I can't remember the exact title of it anymore, but one of the things she said in this book was that sugar is the processed sugar, refined sugar, is the greatest evil to ever be brought into the US. And I thought, oh, come on, this is an exaggeration. But the more I looked into it, I mean, almost every processed product in the supermarket has sugar in it. Not just the sweet stuff, but salad dressings, ketchup, tomato sauce. It's just bizarre to me. Uh, I cut out all the sugar, which was hard because I had to start making my own salad dressing, all this stuff. But I cut out all sugar, and I lost, without even trying, like 30 pounds in 2 months. It was just dropped off with just reducing the sodas and other things. And so that brought me into, well, what else is there that we've been either lied to or misled? And that brought me to the health and wellness, and that's been my focus until 3 or 4 years ago, where I started looking at the kind of the mental health crisis we're facing, and the pandemic just really shining such a bright light on, wow, we are in crisis. And then hearing Jesse Gould's story, who's the founder of Heroic Hearts Project. He's a Army Ranger veteran, and he came back from the Middle East, and I forget how many tours he was on. And the VA said, here's a couple of prescriptions, good luck. He didn't want to go that route, so he did what many veterans do, and many of us do, not just veterans. We self-medicate. So more alcohol, tobacco, cannabis, and maybe other more dangerous things. And uh, finally, and this is one of the other cool things about psychedelics that I love, is that it seems like when you are ready for that healing experience, all of a sudden the psychedelics sort of come into your field of view. And so, one of his army buddies said, "Hey, have you tried ayahuasca?" And he's like, "What is ayahuasca?" And anyway, he went down to Peru, had this experience, a ceremony, came back transformed, healed. Started this, said, I need to help other veterans. Started this nonprofit, and that's what started my whole thing. I had never even heard of ayahuasca, so the same thing for me. I was like, "What the heck is ayahuasca?" And then just again looking at the lies just incensed me that here are these plants and mushrooms that for centuries and centuries and centuries have done healing and sacred mystical work and transformation, healing communities, and they're outlawed to us here in the States. So that's a long-winded background and how we got to where we are right now.
Yeah, that's yeah, the war on drugs. It's really surprising, honestly, how the propaganda really works so well, even with this stuff. I mean, like you said, there was research going on in the 40s, 50s,
Yep.
60s, probably a few thousand research papers. I
Yeah,
don't know, a
yeah, yep,
significant amount.
yes, yep,
And I think I heard in one of Stan Groff's books, like there were conferences going on, lots of
yes.
conferences on LSD therapy.
LSD in particular was well studied. Many therapists used it successfully, and yet that's the most, you know, one that's most, oh, Timothy Leary, and oh my God, it's the most horrible drug, and yet it was studied so intensely, as you said, and the results were fantastic. And then we lost it all.
Yeah, but the good thing is today we have the internet,
Yes.
and I don't think we'll ever, unless there was like a society like wide disaster or something major where everything's destroyed. I the good thing is that information is not going to be able to be suppressed like it was back in the 60s, thankfully.
Yeah,
And
agreed.
I think the internet has allowed us to, or has allowed the minority of people who were advocating for these to get their voice out to the general public, podcasts, social media and things like
Yeah.
that.
I think the other cool thing that I'm glad we're doing some of this research now, even though it seems like it's repetitive, because I love that the research now is looking at these brain scans. So it's not just this is what we think happens to the brain. It's this is what is happening in the brain. And so even though I think some of this research is redundant, it's also amazingly illuminating with this new technology we have for scanning the brain. And so that is a positive aspect too. There's just, you can't deny this proof when you see these brain scans.
Oh, absolutely. And our technology and is much more sophisticated. Our instruments we use to measure things, and then science, like good science, we have the peer review process.
Yep.
So ideally, we should have studies constantly tested and retested, even though today we have that replication crisis. But I think for things like this, the p-value for a lot of these studies, the probability that we get the results we do from these studies, assuming that whatever the treatment wasn't
Right.
affected, is so small. Like today, like probably a week or two ago, MAPS
Yep.
MDMA phase 3 trial was completed. Yeah, yeah. Would you be able to talk about that, and then we'll go back to the other thing
It,
real quick?
it's just, again, it's both amazing and frustrating. It's amazing if you look at the efficacy of these SSRIs, which have barely this or equal to the placebo effect. So basically no real effect, and yet they got approved by the FDA. And here is MAPS doing this MDMA research for decades and each trial, so they have to do a for FDA approval, you have to go through these multiple phase trials, and so that this was the last phase of the trial, and they basically, according to Rick Doblin, asked the FDA to walk through the third trial step by step by step, so that they almost have to approve it, which is what the expectation is in early 2024. But again, it's the the proof of the well, proof the results of MDMA just show such promise for PTSD, and we're seeing that same thing. I think the psilocybin studies are in phase
Mhm.
2 right now, so they still have one more. They still have a phase 3 to do, but same thing for treatment-resistant depression, seeing so much higher results over placebo, over prescription medications, and so that's where the again, as we look at different models of access to psychedelics, that therapy model, I think, is a critical model, because that's going to change hearts and minds, FDA, DEA, and even the general population. Where the other model, which is decriminalize or legalize or things like that, to allow, back to this question you had of access, uh, that's a model I think we have to be pursuing also, because it's I forget who said it, but someone said, it's a fundamental human right to have access to healing plants and medicine. And again, how could they ever make a plant illegal?
Mhm.
But they did. So anyway, we can get off the soapbox on that one. But
Yeah, that's it doesn't make any sense, right? We evolved with plants, we're
yeah,
we're um yeah, the crazy thing about this study, I mean, we had results where like 71% of the trial participants, and these, to get admitted into this kind of study, I mean, you have to have probably tried different therapies and not had any success. So they
right,
would have been severe and treatment resistant.
yep,
And some of them even had a dissociative version of PTSD where
yeah,
they significantly disassociate if there's any trigger. And the next best treatment beyond that isn't even close,
yep,
right, to the
exactly,
effective model. And this is what, we've been prevented from having access to for a few decades because of some political or, I don't know, motives or fear
yeah,
or
yeah.
whatever.
I think it's mostly fear based, some money based, some definitely politically based, racially based, all
Hmm.
those things. Um, but you're right. I mean, just think of how many lives would have been saved over the last 50 years. Um, how many people wouldn't be in jail because of the war on drugs and this process, and how many people would be living to a much greater, fuller potential if they had access to these things. So again, we're at a tipping point where I agree with you what you said earlier. I think we're on this wave, and I just can't imagine that wave just disappearing. So I think we're beyond that point now, but now it's just about um, moving that meter politically, legally, and we're seeing it in a lot of states and cities, but it also would be nice to see that moved higher, at the national level.
Yeah, and you were saying also that because these other treatments like SSRIs, they're helpful short term for
Yep.
people,
Yeah.
but in the long term, the side effects are quite significant. I mean, they numb your other emotions, they reduce libido
Yep.
significantly. There's a lot of other negative side effects, and you're not really addressing the actual problem, which is
Right.
what trauma, like pain and trauma, are there to protect you. They're there also to tell you, like, you know, that something needs to be fixed,
Yeah.
right? And those don't do that at all. And so, of course, people will self-medicate. It's honestly somewhat of a rational decision. If the medical model isn't actually solving their issues, I mean, people want to get healed. They want to do
Yep.
something to help. It would be absurd to expect them to do nothing.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a good point about trauma. I absolutely agree with Dr. Peter Levine, Dr. Gabor Mate that talk about that. We all have experienced trauma in our lives. It's we don't want to compare one person's trauma to another, but I mean, we all have experienced trauma, and the way I love how Dr. Mate explains it, he said there are two types of trauma. One is a trauma that happens to us, car accident, abuse, uh, surgery, anything like that. And then there's trauma that happens that's from something being withheld from us. So we don't get the love we expect, we don't get the feedback or reaction that we expect, and so so there are two elements to it, um, and he proposes, and I am 100% a believer in this. As you look at the data, that so much trauma, I mean, this trauma, and it's not the actual trauma itself; it's the unprocessed emotions related to that trauma. We have this traumatic experience, and then we immediately want to pack it away somewhere and bury it and never see it again. And that's why we have these triggers, as you mentioned. Uh, a veteran hears a truck backfire and immediately has that fight or flight mode, jump into action. Um, but Dr. Matei also says he looked at all these chronic conditions, physical conditions, and he proposes a lot of those are manifestations of that same thing, because the more we stuff things down, the more we're affecting our immune system, the more our mental health, physical health. And so it's, in my mind, imperative that we all seek healing, even if we are kind of unaware that, you know, a lot of childhood trauma is so far buried down that you don't even remember it, or it's not, certainly not in your everyday thinking. It's still there maybe somewhere, but you're like, oh no, I wasn't traumatized by that. And then it's like, oh yes, you probably were.
Yeah, so like what happens in the brain, and this is why MDMA is actually probably one of the most perfect treatments for PTSD. I mean, we have two parts of the brain, one the hippocampus,
Yep,
and the other it's the amygdala.
yep,
And people who've been traumatized and who have PTSD, they need to block out some of those memories. And they need to be able to block out when things from being able to trigger that. It's because, it'd be hard to actually live your everyday life if you're constantly triggered. So it's easier to just repress those memories
yep,
and to minimize any sort of trigger from external environmental things. And as a response, also, you're constantly an emotional, like your amygdala is constantly hyperactivated, constantly on alert in a sympathetic state, like fight or
yep,
flight state.
yep,
And that's not good for our nervous system, for example, because we want to have a balance between our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system.
correct.
And then you get things like chronically low cortisol levels, I believe, in people who've been chronically like have chronic PTSD. And then when another trauma happens, having low cortisol levels makes them more vulnerable to
Yep,
getting PTSD. There's all these things, but we already have our hormones affected by chronic trauma, low cortisol levels, high
yep,
adrenaline sometimes.
yep, yep,
So it makes sense that there would be like real physical consequences also, not hormonal, epigenetic, and nervous system
nervous,
based
yep,
from
yep,
all of these. And what MDMA does is the opposite in a sense. It kind of slows down one's activity in the amygdala, and it also increases activity in the hippocampus so that you
yep,
have the ability to regain access to certain traumatic memories, but also not have such a fear response at the same time. And then you have the ability to kind of work with those, reprocess them, think of those in a new light,
yep,
and really heal from that. And if I recall, like you said, access. This kind of therapy is going to be very expensive. I think MDMA assisted therapy isn't just taking MDMA and then you go home.
Right.
You have three MDMA sessions, 1 month apart, and then you have three prep sessions, 3 sessions in between each MDMA session, and 3 integration sessions. That's it's not, that's not going to be cheap. I think their estimate's
No.
about 15,000 people. But
Yeah.
because, oh yeah, one more.
No, I was going to say we're seeing that in Oregon now too, as they've as they're developing this therapy model. Everyone's jumping on some of the prices, saying, "Whoa, wait a second, this is not what we were expecting." But yeah, you have to, especially when you're talking about therapists, that you have to add it's the therapist costs more than the medicine or anything like that. That's the big cost there. And so that means changing the insurance model maybe, and changing employers' view of benefits, healthcare benefits, possibly including psychedelic assisted therapy. So yeah, I mean, it's access is definitely going to be a big issue, and it's going to be for, I think, for a while, unfortunately.
Yeah, and if we understand the business model of insurance, because right now insurance doesn't like pay for like therapy, like
Right,
psychotherapy or anything of that sort. It's not worth it to them. But like for insurance model, the goal is to obviously make money, and the way they make money is to figure out, right, like they they want to be able to save money by having you be sick less,
right,
Also, let me see. There was, I think the MDMA, I think there's a really good chance that MDMA would be insured for the reason that, PTSD causes so many chronic health issues. It's so damaging to the human body that paying for a $15,000 to help somebody with PTSD would probably be so much cheaper than the healthcare costs in the long term for the people with it.
yeah. Well,
So,
I mean, I think any healing is an investment in the future, but whether the healthcare system or the sick care, as someone said today, system will buy into that or not is I guess yet to be seen. But I agree, it would be great if they looked at that like they look at preventative care, that this is preventative care, or not exactly preventative because they already have it, but an investment into reducing healthcare costs in the future because you're dealing with the healing right now. Yeah.
yeah, and they're the ones paying for it, or
Yep.
the. So yeah, the one thing about trauma, though, and I love Gabor Mate just like you do. He has some really interesting idea. Like for example, I think it was him who said, "Trauma isn't what happened to you; it's how
Yep.
you respond to what happened to you,"
Exactly.
which
Exactly.
is really good distinction because sometimes two different people might go through the exact same incident and one develops a strong trauma response and the other may not,
Yep.
and that's a very complex it's very complex to understand that one feels powerless, right? Another one feels like they can handle those kind of things and they're not powerless, and maybe they don't develop such a strong like protective mechanism.
Yep.
um so I
It
like
also
that.
depends. Good.
Oh yeah, and then I was gonna say one more thing. I was gonna say that another thing Gabor Mate really makes the interesting case for is that a lot of the people he sees that have really strong chronic health issues, who have like really strong addiction to
Yep.
any gambling, sex, substances, whatnot, there almost always seems to be a common denominator that they had major childhood trauma.
Yep.
There are obviously other factors, but that seems to be almost a very dominant factor in all of those things. And of course, people. So he says the war on drugs is actually not a war on drugs, it's a war on people, a war on
Hmm.
addicts.
Yeah.
And that means a war on people who went through trauma and we're punishing them rather than really actually trying to help them.
Yeah.
Yeah, go.
No, I agree 100%. Whether it's addiction, whether it's um all these things that you mentioned, it almost always. Oh, I was going to say the other thing besides addiction, we see that trauma, childhood trauma, especially, creates this drive in people. So it's either, you know, I think they're both negative in one way, but one sees addiction is obviously seen as negative. The other is seen as this drive. So a lot of successful CEOs, athletes, uh, other people that are at the top of their game have really been driven by trauma. So it's kind of interesting. Like maybe some of the most successful people wouldn't have been that successful without that trauma. So it sounds like, oh, well, they should have had it. Like, no, no, they shouldn't have, because I think they would have found that way without it. But it's amazing to see that trauma fuels all so many different things in our lives. And if we just step back from that and look at it, um, we might look at not only ourselves differently, but our neighbors or that person passed out in the bus, bus station on the street or whatever else that, when someone screams at me in the Walmart parking lot, I just look at them and just say to myself, I don't say it out loud, of course, but I just say, you know, there's a trauma response. I don't know what happened that day or in the past, but he's reacting that way because of trauma. And that helps me just walk away from it rather than engaging and God knows what happening after that.
Yeah, and it's even though we do have like free will and we do have the ability to like, sometimes go against, our trauma responses or have a little bit more control, it's really difficult because our nervous system is so powerful, our subconscious is so powerful. I heard a author, I think his name Jonathan Haidt, who wrote a book. I'm trying to remember what it's about, but he talks about this analogy of the rider and the elephant.
Mm.
The elephant is like our subconscious mind, and the rider is like our conscious, rational free will mind. But it's sometimes, if the horse is really strong and it really wants to go one direction, it might be possible to, change directions, but it's going to be hard, even though it might be possible. So somebody who went through a lot of trauma, somebody whose nervous system had been altered so drastically, you know, it, that is not going to be an easy thing to overcome, especially every time.
Yeah.
It's really, we could have a lot of empathy and or sympathy for people who've went through a lot of trauma, and even if they're doing things that aren't good for them or others, we can realize that how difficult it might be to really change, but it's not impossible. And we have,
No,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. And I'll give you my personal example. So um, I was thinking about this when you're talking about two people having the same experience, but one doing well and one not. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. But so I I guess I fit the sort of stereotype in a sense, sadly, that I was assaulted by a priest when I was younger, and um, everyone in my life, including the church, including my family, basically said, "Get over it." And I thought, at first that was, really hurtful and all that, but I thought I had processed it and gotten over it pretty well. And as I look back on my life, there was a period of about 5 years where I guess you would say, some people would say, oh, that's a midlife crisis or whatever, but I just started acting out and I had no control of it. I knew I was acting out, but I didn't really know why. I thought I was perfectly fine, just wanting to have fun or whatever. And it turns out I needed to process that. I thought and that was at that point, that was like 20 years prior, or maybe a little bit longer. But so it's, to anyone, listening, watching, the key is, if we remember that trauma, and I remember that perfectly, vividly, but I thought I was over it. So even if you think you're over it, just, look internally at your behaviors and, are you reaching for that third, fourth, fifth glass of wine, booze at night, or are you doing extra whatever, or are you, doing crazy weekend warrior workouts to get it all out? If it is, just say, look at yourself and say, hey, I might need to be on a healing journey because maybe there's some things that I really haven't processed. I thought I did, but and again, there's nothing bad about a healing journey. I mean, I think a healing journey is fantastic. We should all be looking inside ourselves and discovering new things about ourselves. So I don't think there's anything negative or a sign of weakness. I think it's a sign of strength that you say, "Hey, I want to be better." And so I would suggest everyone do a healing journey.
Mm, absolutely. Yeah, and this is going to get into psychedelics soon. Um, but one of the, like you mentioned, sometimes you don't realize, that something from your childhood, you may have memory of it or you may not,
Right.
that's still affecting you. And that's one of the reasons why maybe you have a certain attachment style, like an anxious attachment style,
Yep.
and that you keep constantly getting attracted to certain kind of toxic relationships, right? And you would have no idea that it might be because of one incident or two or whatnot when you were younger.
Exactly.
And, this is where, the it's like, I mean, obviously psychedelics are really going to help show you that that may otherwise have been so difficult to have realized.
Yeah.
And where things like maybe biofeedback and neurofeedback tools are also going to be really helpful because they can help train your nervous system to, be able to be in a more balanced
Yeah.
nervous system state, between the fight or flight and the rest and digest state. Um,
Exactly.
and that Carl Jung, I think, I don't know if you read Carl Jung.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, Carl Jung, I think Carl Jung had a lot of amazing insights, but two of them were
yeah,
we hear all the time in the psychedelic space. One is shadow work,
yep,
and the
yep,
other inner child work.
yes,
And psychedelics are probably one of the best tools at being able to do both of those. But for those who don't know what those are, I mean, shadow work, you can imagine you have the shadow, which means you have a part of yourself that has been repressed for whatever reason.
yep,
Maybe it's a dark part of yourself that you don't want to look at. Maybe it's a part of yourself that the society would not find acceptable. And so in order to feel accepted or valued, you repress that, or something your parents or priest or whoever, you decided to just repress that part of yourself. It's still there, but you repressed it,
yep,
and you always go out and put on a persona. And then similarly, the inner child, it's similar, but the inner child is more, that who was your authentic self as a child. And
yes, yes,
yeah, sometimes you don't even remember anymore because of, the programming, the socialization, the
yep,
whatever it might be. And so one two really important things if we want to understand why we are the way we are, why we have
mhm,
certain triggers, why our nervous system tends to be, respond in the way it does to different things. We have to be able to, search those, seek those, understand those.
yes,
And I honestly believe things like ayahuasca, things like LSD, you know, they are one of the best tools we have for gaining access to those. Uh, yeah.
yeah. Well, let me just talk about inner child first, because that's sort of the one I'm really am focusing on for myself. Um, and I love how you describe that. Um, so many times in a psychedelic journey, someone sees their 7-year-old self, their 10-year-old self, their 2-year-old self, or their I have one person who has witnessed her own birth, which blows my mind. Uh, but something happens. Well, it doesn't have to be. Well, actually, I guess I think Dr. Matei would say it was traumatic, but something, whether it's a trauma event, or it could just be societal or parental or like you said, religious, church, whatever, that, for me, I heard from my father a lot, just grow up. And that's probably a
Hmm.
refrain that probably a million parents have used over the course of history. So it's not
Yeah.
like that, oh, this is this traumatic event in my life. But, the more you hear that and the more school and society is kind of pushing in that direction. And to me, the inner child work is this beautiful discovery of, yeah, your little Adam or little Rand, that had these ideals and goals and joys that have been trampled by just having to grow up, having to become a productive member of society. So when you can get to a point in healing where you can do inner child work and kind of both heal, sometimes we have to heal that inner child, that by having a discussion, usually detailed conversations in this work. Um, but then again, and so then you're kind of marrying your adult self with that inner child, and then it just really opens your mind to just greater creativity, greater sense of who I call it your authentic self, even though I know authentic is kind of overused, but whatever you want to say, your true self, your authentic self, the person you were meant to be. And it's that, to me, when you do inner child work, it's this great weight lifting off you, both mentally. I mean, it can't really be physically, but it feels that way. So I think that's a great aspect of that. And then shadow work, you also described that perfectly. Um, I'm on a big kick about that because one of the issues we have in psychedelics is a lot of, in the non-therapy model, we have a lot of facilitators and guides and trip sitters that are helping people with these medicines. But if those guides and facilitators aren't doing their own work, the really interesting thing with psychedelics is if you don't do the shadow work, if you don't face those inner darkness, psychedelics will actually enhance your ego, your sense of greatness, your sense of self. So shadow work is not meant to, we talk about also in psychedelics, ego disillusion or ego death. And it's not, we don't get rid of our ego. It's more like our ego finally gets in check a little bit because it's had free reign for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And it just, but we have to do that. We have to do the work, that shadow work, because if we don't, uh, like I had an ayahuasca healer that claimed, he was God's gift to ayahuasca, and I was like, oh boy, he has not been doing his own work.
Yeah, I mean, we see this, especially in ayahuasca, but we see this all over the place.
Yep,
Like, you think we have facilitators who clearly taken the substance or the medicine many times,
yep,
and yet, we hear of cases all the time in the ayahuasca world of like sexual abuse, all sorts of things where they think
yeah,
they're, everything, and I don't know. I mean, it's like you have to do the work, and you could tell, these people haven't done their work. They could take the medicine,
yep.
and yet they didn't get what they should have from it. Like, what if they listened to it and they applied it?
Exactly, and that's why I know we might talk about this, but that you mentioned it with the MDMA, and so I just want to stress it again. That's why the integration is also so important. It's not just taking the medicine. In fact, these substances are more of a tool to help us. I sort of a cliche in psychedelics that the healing is within us, but that's true. And what the psychedelics do is they show us that. I mean, that's the greatest thing to me, and um, that we can cut through this and see where we need the healing, but we have to do the work afterwards. We can't just say, all these. I blame partly the pharmaceutical ads because we see all these ads. Take a pill and now you can play volleyball, or you know, climb Mount Everest, and all these things. And so we just expect magic pills, but but these medicines do cut through stuff. And I love when people say things like, oh, it was like 5 years of therapy in one night. And it's not that we're downplaying therapy at all. It's that the psychedelics, there's no filter. It's going to show you what you need to see if you are intentional about it. And then the process has been, okay, now I need to integrate what I learned about that into my life now. And that's that doing the work and the integration part of it as well.
Yeah, and psychedelics are really interesting because when I first got into them, I was trying to treat social anxiety disorder, and other therapies weren't very effective. And I understood, that there was some kind of resistance, and that was my ego, right? The ego was it was trying to protect me in a sense. It was, it's afraid of,
Yep.
if I don't know, it's afraid that, the anxiety is trying to protect me from the future, right? It's trying to
Yep.
protect me from harmful things, and it's a blockage. I don't know
Yep.
how to explain it. Somebody wrote that it also blocks all attempts to access the client's internal world too, right? Anxiety,
Yeah.
because you're afraid of what you might. Maybe I'm not explaining that right, but so like I had read a lot of books on neuroplasticity,
Yep.
and I realized, that neuroplasticity makes your brain more malleable by definition.
Yep.
And the other things like cognitive behavioral therapy, they didn't, everything causes neuroplasticity to some extent, but it just was very insignificant.
Right.
But something like when you look at these clinical trials, you look at, the Imperial College of
Yep.
London's work or their brain scans, you see heavy neuroplasticity.
Right.
But what's crazy also, not only does it change the brain, it gives you an experience that also tends to not only change you, but also change you in a direction that's almost always positive.
Yep.
You could imagine you could be more neuroplastic, but what if it was equally where the change is negative and equally as positive? But that's not what happens here,
Right.
which is really interesting. One reason I think is because they promote self-awareness and self-discovery is one big reason,
Yes.
in my view. Um, uh, yeah, I forgot where I was going with this, but
All right. Well, let me jump in while you're thinking about that. So, yeah,
yeah,
to me, that the geekiest, coolest part are those brain scans, and if we look, to me, the greatest story was someone with OCD who talked about that as this hamster wheel that puts a groove in her brain, and she can't get off the thought. She can't get off the thought, and the more she thinks about it, the groove gets deeper and deeper. And the other, so to me, the other crazy part about psychedelics, besides increasing this plasticity, it finds this broken parts, this broken grooved thing, and says, no, we don't need that anymore, and cuts it. Not literally, but I mean, basically cuts it off. And you know, she walks away saying those thoughts are gone. I mean, it's and so in that sense, it almost is a some so it is a magic pill. Well, no, not exactly. Uh, it is in some situations. I mean, again, if you look at addictions, especially with ibogaine, we see someone who has an ibogaine treatment, and literally the next day, I never want to touch that substance again. I'm not even thinking about it. So there are times where it is that almost miraculous, um, but the fact that it can both fix damaged parts, but also enhance and build and make our brain more flexible is just another amazing reason why to at least consider psychedelics.
yeah, ibogaine is extremely powerful. I mean, I've never done it, but you hear the stories,
Yeah,
and it's like a day long, 24-hour,
yeah,
like
extremely long.
the trip itself, right? The main part
Yep,
of the trip, and then everything around in your environment is so like vivid. sometimes it really, like even on mushrooms, you can kind of tell it's, not here,
Right.
right? Like seems like with ibogaine, like they're not there, but it's like it's more real in front of you what you're seeing. And then for several days after, you have that really strong afterglow with ibogaine. And some of these people are reporting that I think it was what's his name, Howard Lotza, who was the first person to realize that ibogaine has an anti-addictive potential back in the
Yeah.
early 70s.
Yeah.
He he was in New York, and he just did substances and he didn't want to quit. He was just using them for recreation basically. And one time, some person offered him ibogaine. I don't know if it was a professor friend of his or a researcher friend of his, and he realized after the experience, he was like, "Wait, I've been in this experience for more than a
Mhm.
day, and I
Mhm.
have no withdrawal symptoms. I'm not even like thinking about heroin because he was addicted to heroin." And that's when he realized that he needed to go and learn more about this and, educate people about its
Yeah.
anti-addictive properties. So ibogaine is, but again, it's inaccessible to a lot of people. So,
Exactly. It is. Yeah.
and that is one that you could die off of if you had like a not so good heart condition or certain
Right.
conditions.
Yeah, Ibogaine is the one where most of the times they have a medical staff on hand because uh, if you have any kind of respiratory issue or heart issue, you have to be extra careful with that substance for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, and then when first we were talking about the neuroplasticity aspect of psychedelics, psychedelics work through several different means. One is the neuroplasticity and rewiring your thought patterns,
Hmm.
right, causing a disturbance. I think Michael
Yep.
Pollan had a really good analogy in his book with the snowfall, right?
Yes. Yep.
We want to tend to take the path of least action, least resistant
Yep.
a lot of times.
Yep.
And sometimes we get these thought loops that become repetitive, and every time you think those thoughts, it's if like you take the same path down a mountain, a snowy
Yep.
mountain.
Yep.
And the more you take that path, the more deeper the groove is, and the more that taking such a path is the path of least resistance. And so that's the easiest path to take generally. And psychedelics seem to cause some, like they turn off the default mode network, which
Right.
then causes a flood of activity, and that disturbs those neural pathways. And it's like you get a snowfall completely just resetting so that you don't have all these grooves and you have the
Yep.
possibility to change what's going to be the path of least resistant down the mountain. And the best analogy I heard for why, like turning off the default mode network, which is the region of your brain where you get stuck in different thought patterns or
Yep.
automatic thought patterns or your sense of self.
Yep.
Your The reason turning off that region leads to much more activity in the brain is because the example I heard is if you have a major city and you have this major bridge that most people have to go through to get to the city to go to work, and then you shut that down, well, people still need to go to work.
Right.
So they're going to just become interspersed and find other routes.
Yep.
And but another
Yeah,
reasons,
yeah. So
yeah,
that's another cool part. Again, you can actually see that happening in some of these brain scans. But yeah, so yeah, when the big loud voice, or I think about that when the speaker gets laryngitis, the big loud voice in the room gets laryngitis. Other speakers then pick up the pace, and so same thing when this default mode network shuts down, that loud, constant voice, all these other parts of the brain are like, oh yes, now it's my chance to finally have a say, and you can actually hear them. I mean, they're still always there, but the default mode network is constantly filtering all that stuff out. And so by shutting it down, you open these other avenues like you just gave with that city. You find other ways to commute into the city. Yeah, it's a great analogy.
Yeah, so when these psychedelics, they have that potential to like to change your perspective on things, right?
Yep.
It's the things that we tell ourselves that often lead to how we respond to things around us emotionally. It's the things we believe. It's the perspective we have, right?
Yep.
And our response, obviously, if we have an emotional response where, I don't know, like you get a trigger, right, for PTSD, like if you didn't have that thought to begin with that certain kinds of events lead to certain outcomes, like dangerous outcomes, like an explosion, you might see like a car go by and that reminds you of an explosion because you were in a car when you were in war or something.
Right.
Or if you didn't believe that, that would be really difficult to have a really strong emotional response. Um, but the other thing the trauma seems to do is it gets stored in the body through other means. Like obviously, like we talked about earlier, the nervous system,
Yep.
that's mostly subconscious,
Yep.
and then epigenetically, right? We have, back in the 1990s, before then, we thought we just had a sequence of, four characters and that was our genetic makeup, A, T,
Right.
C, and G, and that was it. They code for proteins, and then anything that doesn't cause the creation of proteins is just junk DNA. But they're starting to realize now that they're not really junk DNA, that
Right.
there's this overlay, like that of all of those actually have a real purpose, and they are usually involved in like the process to which we, you know, deal with how we express our genes.
Right. Exactly. That's the other cool part. Yeah. But anyway, go ahead. Keep going. Yeah.
And so, like, you'll see this in identical twin studies, right? You'll see two identical twins. They may grow up in the exact same environment, or they may not, or they may grow up in a different environment, but they're identical twins, so they have the exact same genome, the
Yep.
exact same DNA, and yet oftentimes, you know, they get different conditions, right? Even though there is a lot of similarities between them, there also is, the environment makes a huge difference on their life outcomes. It does actually diverge more as they age.
Makes sense.
And
And
and and part of that's because, you know, constantly the environment is affecting, which genes get expressed, which ones don't, which ones are, I think when they get methylated, they don't
yep.
express themselves and other things. And they realize that the environment constantly affects our epigenome, constantly. Like if you're a longtime meditator, that's going to affect your epigenome.
Yep.
They're starting to realize now with some ayahuasca and MDMA studies that some psychedelics seem to also alter our epigenetics. I saw some studies down in like I think it's Chile. This researcher who was checking to see like does ayahuasca alter our epigenome, and he saw like
Wow.
there was a few epigenetic markers that were actually altered by the experience. And I believe, from my understanding, that one of the reasons why trauma is so long lasting, it doesn't you don't just have trauma for a little while and it's
Right.
gone.
Right.
It's like, how does that work? Well, they realize part of that has to do with the fact that if you alter your epigenome, those alterations in your epigenome tend to persist even when the cell divides over and over and over again. And this is like a biochemical explanation for how trauma can be stored for so long. But it's really cool. You got like Joe Tafur, you
Hmm.
got Rachel Yehuda, and you got
Yep.
some other people down in Chile realizing that psychedelics can reverse some of this damage of trauma through epigenetic modification, which is incredible.
It is all the research that I mean. That's again the other thing we talked about. Yes, I'm mad that the research all has restarted since the product substances were banned. But I love, on the other hand, all these new avenues we're going deeper into, like you just mentioned. And so, if we hadn't been forced to do this research, we might not have been going down some of these cool rabbit holes and discovering even more benefits of psychedelics and plant medicines.
Yeah, and before we get into all the stories, which I definitely think we should before the end, there are a lot, I think this is ongoing debate, but I think it's really interesting, is intergenerational trauma. I
Yep.
know actually somebody brought it up in the book, but what they realized, I think the first like realization that there probably was trauma that could be passed down a couple generations or more. I think it had to do with the famines of, and somewhere in Scandinavia there was this major famine during the time of,
Mm,
the World War II,
yeah.
and Hitler had blocked the ability for food and a bunch of things to be transported into one of these areas. Was it Scandinavia? It was somewhere over there in Europe, and there was a major famine that happened as a
Yep.
result of that. And they seem to have noticed years later that people who were in the womb, like in a maybe I think it was was it the first or third trimester? It was actually different. The results were different depending on the trimester. That even 2 generations later, if the parent was in the third trimester, they tended to have higher rates of diabetes. They tended to have higher rates of chronic health issues, or depression. Versus if you were in a different trimester, you still had higher rates of those, but it wasn't as much. So it even like what time you were in the, womb had made a difference during the famine. And if
Wow.
you weren't, if you were already born, or it did affect you obviously, but it wouldn't have affected you or your offspring as much, even if you weren't in the womb, right? I don't know. Yeah, everyone
It's
would have to go do their research, but
Yeah, yeah. That's, I mean,
um,
I know a little bit what you're talking about, but I just see it in so many other situations, and I think even separate from the actual research on that, if you look at like I call this year for me kind of the year of my father because he was a pretty strict disciplinarian and had substance abuse issues and other things going on in his life, and I spent a lot of years kind of thinking of him negatively. And this year, it was I haven't even done psychedelics. It's more just about integrating and healing. And I started looking at his relationship with his mother, and I saw how ill or how unhealthy their relationship was, and how that trauma from her, whatever she experienced, was passed down to him, and he kind of passed it down to his kids. And so just from my own personal experience, I see that, um, and we joke sometimes, as if we're a parent and all of a sudden we hear our parents saying something, their voice in our head to our kid, and we go, "Oh my God, I sound like my parent." But I think that's part of that process of parenting, that you, both the good and the bad, do get stuck in your head, and uh, that is a big part of psychedelic healing now. Is not just our own trauma, but releasing the trauma from past generations. And that's, like you said, one of the stories in the book is this having this discussion with her grandmother and trying to heal that intergenerational trauma.
yeah, and I want to bring this up later, but but remind me if I forget.
Okay.
People who are from like marginalized communities, or who has a hit, or whose family has a history of marginalization, like blacks, Jews, indigenous people,
Yep.
you know, they they have they probably also inherited, through this epigenetic means, trauma that was done to their grandparents or great grandparents,
Yep.
or for example, I think they did some studies, again, you'd have to check this, on indigenous individuals here in the US whose grandparents had been forced off of
Oh.
the,
Yeah.
yeah, it's really awful to think about, but they were forced off the reservations and
Yep.
forced to go into these boarding schools and not allowed to use their own language. They
Yep.
had to learn Christianity. They had to accept it. They had to only use English.
Yep.
It was just, it's a really dark period of US. And,
Yes.
of course, you're going to get very traumatized from that kind of thing. And I think they were able to see some of those epigenetic markers a couple of generations later from that trauma. They were able to see that.
I believe it.
Yeah, and I like scientific evidence like you, so I found this research study. I just want to read what they said real quick. I wrote it down. It says in 2014, Brian Diaz and Carrie Ressler reported an intergenerational epigenetic pathway that ran through sperm. They gave a male mouse a mild electric shock as it smelled a cherry blossom scent, stimulating a fear response to the odor. The response was accompanied by epigenetic changes in the brain and sperm. Intriguingly, the male offspring of the shocked mice demonstrated a similar fear of cherry blossoms,
Wow.
as well as epigenetic changes in their brain and sperm, without being exposed to the shock, and the effects were passed down for at least 2 generations.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right. So I think that's really important because sometimes like even me, I'm like, my childhood, there was some trauma, but it wasn't like the worst. I hear stories all the time, people who have really awful childhood.
Yeah.
Like, there's
Yeah.
no way that my childhood it caused me to have social anxiety disorder, but it might have, right?
Uh-huh.
But I'm like, even if there wasn't, that doesn't mean you're not, affected by trauma from what happened to your parents or grandparents.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly.
So I thought that's a really important thing I thought we should talk about. And
Yeah.
again, psychedelics do seem to help heal that too.
Yeah. And the other component that I love, and I don't talk about as much because I'm so focused on healing, but there's a beautiful, beautiful spirituality component to psychedelics. Not religious in any way necessarily, unless a person's already religious, but just this sense of greater connectedness and a sense that there's some sort of higher power, whether it's aliens, whether it's God, whether it's Allah, whether it's whatever it is. And so many people, have these encounters with the supernatural during a psychedelic experience. And so I don't want to discount even just that alone if you don't think you've had any trauma just for that, but you're kind of doubting or I think that's the component that helps people with who are near death too. This sense of, oh, there's something, there's got to be an afterlife of some sort, spirit, soul, whatever, because they experience a psychedelic journey that shows them there's so much more to the world than that we visibly see.
Oh yeah. And oh yeah, you also mentioned sometimes you encounter your ancestors, right, in these experiences, like these
Yeah,
reports.
yeah,
And part of that's probably because some of that trauma that they had is stored in you somewhere.
yeah,
And the other thing you brought up earlier, which I forgot to mention, was people sometimes relive their birth or see their birthing experience. And one of the things that Stan Groff, one of the original LSD
yep, yep,
therapists, had discovered, he has this idea of the four perinatal matrices. He realized through a lot of these really high dose LSD sessions that people would constantly, be like, "Oh, I was reliving my birth," and it was very traumatic.
yeah.
I'm not going to remember that, like most people
Right.
don't remember their
I
birth,
know, I know, exactly.
And yeah, I think even somebody in this book, I don't know, was it? No, I think it was somebody I heard recently, but not in this book. But she said that she had so much like PTSD and all these health issues, and she could not figure out like why she had all this. And she later figured out it was because her blood type had not matched that of her mother. And we have a solution to that now, but
Yeah.
for whatever reason, they didn't use that solution while she was, in the womb. And can you imagine being inside of your
Wow.
mother and her blood not attacking?
All right,
I
being
don't know.
alien to you in a way. Yeah, wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's no way she's going to remember, what happened during that time.
Right.
but she's going to have the effects during her lifetime of this trauma that happened to
Yeah.
her. That's
Yeah. Well, even just back to Dr. Matei again too, because he talked about, here he was a successful physician and uh, helping all these people with addiction and driven to success and married and kids and grandkids. And it wasn't until he had this psilocybin ceremony where he saw that he had been, his mom had given him up in the Nazi occupation to another woman to try to save his life because she thought the Nazis were going to kill the family. And they were reunited, I think, 2 or 3 months, a very short time later. And he grew up with his mom after that. And so you would say, well, there's no trauma there. How would you even remember as a 2 month old or as as a baby that your mom that you're just associating with abandon you, but yet he did, and it led to him for most of his life having an issue with self-love, loving himself, and then accepting love from others. So yet while he was married, kids, all these people loving him, he acted like he accepted it, but he had no concept of it. So I mean, just that short window, or like you said, or having a different blood type in the womb, just something like that you have no possible conscious memory of or understanding, yet it's traumatic enough that it's still in your system, still affecting how you live your life. So yeah, it comes back to, yeah, we all need healing.
yeah, and thank goodness we have things like psychedelics to, to really help that because,
Yeah,
before, again, we were just relying on medications and some talk therapy, but talk therapy isn't really going to most of the time get to that deep roots.
yeah,
Right. And especially if it's, the blood type not matching with your mother's, talk therapy will
right,
never get to that,
right,
right?
exactly, exactly.
um,
Yeah, I mean, yeah, like I said, I love talk therapy, but part of the problem is A, I might not even know what that trauma was, as you just said, and B, I might not want to. I control the discussion as the client. So if I don't want to discuss it, we'll discuss how the Mets were doing or whatever, not talk about the real issue. Where, like I said, psychedelics says nope. We're going to talk about the real issue. I got you. You're here now, and that's fantastic and that's why I do like the psychedelic with the therapy, because then you can have this experience and now you have this therapist and you can talk it out and say, okay, what do you think this means? Why did I see my father as a dragon or something like that, and have that discussion.
yeah, another downside of talk therapy, especially for people who have very severe, chronic PTSD or a dissociative type, if you just were doing the talk therapy, sometimes talking or trying to talk about the therapy could be so traumatic in and of itself
Yeah.
and make things worse.
Yep. I've definitely heard people re-traumatized because of that. Yeah.
Yeah, which thankfully for MDMA, the chances of that happening are much smaller.
Yeah.
So yeah, the special thing that I thought about the book again was that you gave a voice to some of these people in the marginalized community, and like I mentioned before, some of these individuals do have a unique kind of trauma, right? That's different, even though there is something that's common to all traumas,
Yeah.
and I think we should emphasize our common humanity with everybody. We should emphasize that we can relate to everybody, that we can relate to trauma, like at some, in a general sense.
Yeah.
But some people have a very different kind of trauma. I'm not going to have been somebody who had trauma because I'm, Native American or something, you know.
Yeah.
So it's, or,
Yeah.
especially with Native Americans, the way we treat them, the way we have treated them, it's horrible. We, we still treat them like, they're second class citizens today, of
Oh yeah.
course. So we should be talking about that for sure.
Yeah, I think the one thing I like about these stories also, besides giving a voice to as many people as possible, is it gives those of us who have had, for lack of a better word, an easier path, a sense of, oh, I shouldn't be taking as much for granted, or wow, I have been taking a lot of things for granted, that I could own property or get an education, or uh not be spit upon every time I cross the street, or all these injustices we see when we're not, that we don't experience when we're part of the majority, but it goes on all the time down to those who are um, not represented well, and that's kind of a sad state of humanity, I think, but a kind of a truth of it too.
Yeah, and it also, for example, with the war on drugs, if we believe that addiction is a choice, or if we believe it's just a disease that, because you were born with a genetic predisposition to it, that's going to drastically alter, how you treat those people versus if you realize almost all addiction is a result of, trauma, that these people are really suffering. Like as Gabramate says, don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain. Yeah, right. A lot
Yeah.
of these people, once you realize that the thing that caused them to have
Yep.
an addiction to begin with was trauma, and and then if you stigmatize them, if you prevent them from being able to
Yep.
find jobs, if denigrate them, you're putting them in those exact same very conditions that led them to be addicted in the first place, to have to need that as a coping mechanism. And if your goal really is to actually stop it, slow down addiction, reduce it, the just your understanding of how addiction works affects the kind of solutions you're going to propose. And obviously, most people have understood it as a choice or as a disease most of human history, or at least in the last 100 years. And that's led to things like the war on
Yeah.
drugs, and it's ended up making addiction worse, more overdose.
Yep.
It's
Yep.
made things actually much worse in terms of the health of these people. So it's also really
Yeah.
important for us to, because it helps us treat people, more like humans, or gives us empathy and stuff.
Yeah. Oprah has a book with a doctor. I can't remember his name right now, but I love it because it's titled "What Happened to You," and they make this big point, just like you said with Gabor. Instead of saying you're an addict, it's see the pain. Here, it's what's instead of saying what's wrong with you, what happened to you, because that changes that reframes that question. So rather than be, what's wrong with you, puts me on the defensive immediately. Whereas what's happened to you, oh, let me share my story. And I think that's just a beautiful. And by the way, I have to tell you, uh, for the listeners and everything else, we didn't plan this, but one of the big words that last year came to me in a psilocybin journey was perspective. So I love that you mentioned that earlier, because that has been any time now where I am stuck, or I start digging in on something, I just hear that perspective, and I have to pull myself back and say, okay, let me look at this a different way. And okay. So I think that is so psychedelics also change your perspective. And so that's why, again, Silicon Valley has been using it supposedly for years, because it increases, uh, changes perspective, increases creativity, back to that neuroplasticity also. Um, so all these benefits that come from it, besides healing, but healing again to me is the focus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me see. So one of these stories are I actually got a lot of value from,
Good,
actually
yeah.
I actually messaged some friends of mine. I'm like, "Oh wow, this actually might actually help me." Right? Like
Yeah, yeah, that's what I want, exactly.
yeah. It was chapter a DT who
Yeah.
yeah, and women, Indian and millennial. But she had this quote, and I wrote it down, and it made me like, oh, wait, maybe this is why I have such an issue crying. And I'll explain that in a minute.
Yeah, yeah.
So the quote is, this experience represented an exact replica of how I felt in real life. I held myself back from expressing my full self because I didn't want to rock the boat or cause a scene. I was always told to take the high road, be pleasant, and not create any trouble. But now I was faced with a dilemma. Was I going to disturb the peace and get my healing, or let go of my healing to keep the peace in the room? And I heard that because I've been having a hard time figuring out, like, why do I have such a hard time crying? Like, I went over 10 years without a single tear, right? And, it's obviously a trauma response. It's
Yep.
obviously, I repressed it. And maybe part of that was the emotion itself would be too overwhelming to me. And I think that is part of it. But I also was like, it's even more difficult for me to cry if there's anybody around. So when I do generally cry, I usually do it alone or I hide it. And I could not figure out like I couldn't, I kept asking myself like what are my thought patterns? Why do I keep going back and resisting it so much? And I'm like, it's not like it's the worst thing in the world.
Mhm.
I'm like, but this made me think, wait, I think it's because I don't want to disturb the peace. I
Yeah.
don't want to cause any, like, I don't know, I don't want to change, the regular order of things. But I went to a healing retreat recently. We were doing a lot of group healing. And there were
Yeah.
several times where I knew I needed to cry, but I couldn't because I didn't want any attention on me. I didn't want to
Mm.
disturb the group in any way or what was going on.
Mm.
So it really, I was like, what? Actually, that did make me actually think, and I've been thinking about it more because of that quote right there.
And here, thank you, first of all, and for many things, but this is why I wrote the book. I mean, just that I want everyone, and I think everyone will find some quote, some piece, some story that just, wow, I wonder how I could use this new knowledge in my life or think differently. And I love that you pulled that out because that's exactly why this book is out there, is to just have everyone, read these stories and just decide for themselves, is this something that can help you, whether it's the wisdom they got from the psychedelic or the psychedelic itself, or the what, or the type of ways they integrated. For her, it gave her the confidence to finish this book that she wrote, and she's been on a year-long journey with this book and helping others in their journey. And so I love that you brought that up. Um, I think for me, just as a little funny aside, psychedelics have, I was always growing up, I became the peacemaker in a different way in my family, just to keep the peace. But um, and I didn't cry that much only because that was a sign of weakness more than I wasn't, in my family, it was that sort of traditional, macho family.
Mm,
And psychedelics have made me Mr. Waterworks now. I mean, you know, on anytime I talk about, especially some of the harder stories, whether in the book or just I've heard since then, it's hard for, I will, even though I'll say, darn it, I'm not going to choke up today, or I'm not going to start crying, 99 times it does, because and at first I was embarrassed by it, and I decided, no, I mean, it's just what psychedelics have made me. It's made me just freer with my
mm,
emotions, and I think that's a good thing. I think men and women, but maybe especially men of a certain age, maybe hopefully not your generation, but certainly my generation, were, keep your emotions in check,
mhm.
because showing emotions is sort of a sign of weakness. So you have to, be the non-readable person.
Yeah, that's true. I was thinking one before we end because we're coming up on time.
I know we're getting close. Yeah.
Yeah, there's, this is so many things we could talk about, but I was wondering,
Mm.
like, just like, was there anything in, like, just like in that story for me, was there one story that stuck out to you that made you really think, or made you really like want to introspect, or something along those lines?
The one for me, so I grew up Episcopal, and I just happened to get introduced to a Episcopal priest who was in one of the Johns Hopkins studies of religious leaders,
Hmm.
and I was fascinated by that study. Amazed that I was able to talk to him, meet him, and then he agreed to be in the book. And I guess there was a time in my life where I thought I might go into seminary, I might become a minister. And it's kind of funny now because there was just a study published about the need for psychedelic chaplains. And I've had like 4 people text me that thing, like, you could have been a psychedelic chaplain. So it's kind of funny. Anyway, um, I've always had this faith in my life. I lost it for a time when I was in my meltdown, and I, sort of did the God, why have you forsaken me, and self-pity and all that stuff. And I've refound that faith partly through nature, partly through psychedelics. And so Hunt's story sticks with me because here is this very successful priest, um, and yet in his psilocybin journey, he gets so deeply into the medicine and the spirituality that he speaks in tongues. Um, and later he talks about how he felt like, while he had been ordained in the church and all that, that in this experience he had been ordained by God to be a priest. And it just, I don't know, it's just something about that deepening of faith that also um, I don't know, just brings me joy about psychedelics, that these medicines have all these different avenues of healing and experiences. And I had a similar experience in an ayahuasca journey where on the cloudy, dark, rainy night, I looked up and I saw all the souls in heaven and the brightest lit sky I've ever seen in my life. And so it resonated with me that his spiritual encounter with my spiritual encounter. And so again, so yeah, I think we all can find little bits of our lives, of our experiences, of our hopes, dreams within these stories.
Yeah. So last thing, I do want to read one more thing in there, but I want to ask what, like, give, I don't know if you call it an elevator pitch, but
Wow.
like, um, I think this book does have a unique element, as we talked about earlier, that some other books are not offering. It's different than How to Change Your Mind, or, you know, um, The Doors of Perception,
Yeah.
you know, like, what, what, would you say that, how would you persuade the average person that this would be a really, like, good book for them, that it can help them, grow as a person, work on their healing process, or even help people that they're close to.
Sure.
Uh, and
I would say I love How to Change Your Mind. I love Michael Pollan and all his work, but he writes at a level that's maybe a little too advanced for some of us, a little too geeky, a little too, I mean, it's fantastic. He references all this stuff, so I love that aspect as a person who wants to see the references. My book, I wanted to bring it down to a level that we could all understand. So again, that's sort of the educator in me. So my book, I call it For the Psychedelically Curious. You've heard about psychedelics, you're not so sure about it. Maybe you're a little overwhelmed by the massive thickness of How to Change Your Mind.
yeah,
This book is about a third of the size of that one. Um, and then this book has half the book, or a third of the book, are kind of the true facts about psychedelics, so you can learn about each psychedelic substance and the history and how they might be used. And then the two-thirds are the stories. And again, I think that's where you can just see psychedelics in action. And that to me is maybe something that will change your mind because you can see in it how it's changed these people's lives.
Yeah, I some of these stories prove that these things not only like have a positive impact. Sometimes these positive impacts are so drastic, it's almost hard to believe if you've never gone through it.
Yeah.
So again, I'm gonna read this one quote from the book to end
Okay.
off this. And again, for anybody who's interested, the book is Triumph Over Trauma by Dr. Randall Hansen. He also has a lot of a significant amount of resources like podcasts or books and documentaries, psychedelics that he was able to filter through and provide. There's not a lot of those online, but I wanted to end with this poem. It's so poetic to me, like
Mhm.
this quote from the book from this woman, Jessica, who is a Brazilian and millennial, and she had blamed her mom on a lot of the issues with her and her family and such. And she wrote this beautiful poem, in my view. So she wrote, quote, I drank my mushroom tea. I saw my mother, but not as my mother. I saw her just like me, as someone who could be my best friend now.
Mhm.
It was like a mirror. She was me, and I was her. When I saw myself and her as one, I finally could understand and forgive her. By seeing the beauty in her, I saw beauty in myself. By accepting her, I accepted myself. And by forgiving her, I felt love for myself. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just, let's see.